All right, good afternoon. It is now 1:02, so we'll go ahead and get started. Everyone that's joined us, thank you, and thank you for joining us today. And welcome to CMS's Inflation Reduction Act Careers Info session. We're super excited to have you here today. My name is Sean Forbes. I'm a recruiter with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And today we'll be talking all about the Inflation Reduction Act and the careers that are brought by the Inflation Reduction Act or the IRA. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted to YouTube and the IRA's career page. A colleague will post a link in the chat box. Closed captioning is there if needed. Please click on the CC button below. A follow-up email will be sent to everyone, to all registered attendees, which will include today's slides. If you have any questions today, please feel free to ask in the Q&A box below. Our colleagues are standing by to help answer your questions. So without further ado, we're going to get started and talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and its careers. So again, my name is Sean Forbes, and I'm a recruiter in the Division of Strategic Customer Relations within CMS. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what CMS is, and we also have three great presenters for you today. Maria Ramirez from the Center for Medicare is here, and she's going to talk about IRA and the career opportunities. Shakia Ward from the Office of Human Capital is joining us today, and she's going to talk all about USAJobs and the application process and what a vacancy announcement or a job posting looks like. And Ashley Harris, also from the Office of Human Capital, is joining us today, and she'll talk all about federal resumes and how you can optimize your federal resume to get noticed, and also to hopefully get you an interview and then a hire. So we're going to talk a little bit about CMS. What is CMS? CMS, or the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, is the largest purchaser of healthcare in the world. It's responsible for one of our nation's most critical functions: Medicare, Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, and the federal health insurance exchanges touches the lives of over 145 million people. CMS's mission is to serve the public as a trusted partner dedicated to advancing health equity, expanding coverage, and improving health outcomes. Where are we located? We're located just outside of Baltimore in Woodlawn, Maryland. But we also have 10 regional offices throughout the country as well, including remote work. So now let's talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and why we're hiring. So as you may be aware, on August 16th, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law. This allows CMS to negotiate drug prices, caps out-of-pocket spending for prescription drugs in Medicare, and gives Americans more affordable access to health insurance coverage at healthcare.gov. But in order to support the implementation of this new law, CMS plans to fill more than 200 positions with talented and experienced professionals in a wide variety of specialties, to include pharmaceuticals, economics, health policy, research, social science, program management, IT, and much more. My colleague will put a link in the chat for the IRA careers page at cms.gov that'll explain this in a little more detail and have links to current opportunities. But next, to provide even greater detail and how this impacts the Center for Medicare, Maria Ramirez, who's the acting deputy director for the Medicare Drug Rebate and Negotiation Group, is standing by to talk to you. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sean. My name is Maria Ramirez, and I am the acting deputy group director for operations for the Medicare Drug Rebate and Negotiation Group. So as Sean mentioned, on August 16th, President Biden signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. The IRA makes improvements to Medicare. For example, it reduces the price of insulin to $35 and offers free vaccine for Medicare beneficiaries. The IRA is the most significant impact to the pharmaceutical industry since the Affordable Care Act in 2010. The IRA imposes a requirement on manufacturers to negotiate drug prices with Medicare. The Center for Medicare is responsible for implementing these changes. Negotiation of drug pricing represents a new work for Medicare and the reason we created the new group, the Medicare Drug Rebate Negotiation Group. They will be responsible for overseeing the drug price negotiation and inflation rebate provision of IRA. Other groups within CM will also be responsible for other provisions. Today, I'm presenting a quick overview on the rebate and negotiation group. Other groups from CM will also be receiving the resumes, and they are also posting positions, as Sean was mentioning. The groups are the Medicare Drug Benefit Group and the Medicare Plan Payment Group. So going into IRA, the IRA requires Medicare to establish a drug negotiation program to negotiate and renegotiate drugs with drug manufacturers to make sure that we have a maximum fair price for drugs selected for negotiation. These selected drugs will be subject to mandatory price negotiation under Medicare beginning in 2026. IRA requires the Secretary to select for negotiation 10 Part D drugs for 2026, plus 15 Part D drugs for 2027, plus 15 Part B and Part D drugs for 2028, and 20 Part B and Part D drugs each year thereafter. In this process, CMS will enter into agreements with manufacturers of the selected drugs for negotiation. IRA requires manufacturers to provide access to maximum fair price to Part D beneficiaries, to pharmacies, mail order services, hospital physicians, and other providers with respect to the Part B drugs. For the negotiation process, we're required to use a consistent methodology and process to achieve the lowest maximum fair price for the selected drugs. CMS provides the manufacturers of the selected drugs with an initial written offer. The manufacturer can accept that offer, or they can provide a counteroffer. The negotiations are not concluded prior to August 1st, 2024, then the manufacturer can face the imposition of an excise tax. So for the timelines, for 2026, as we start this new process, no later than September 1st, 2023, CMS will publish the selected drugs. No later than October 1st, 2023, the Secretary will enter into agreement with the manufacturers. No later than October 2nd, 2023, the manufacturer submits information to the Secretary. No later than February 1st, 2024, the Secretary will make written initial offers to the manufacturers. And prior to August 1st, 2024, the negotiation period ends. No later than September 1st, 2024, CMS will publish the maximum fair prices. Under the inflation rebate, the IRA requires manufacturers of the Part D rebatable drug to pay a rebate to the Medicare Trust Fund if the drug's annual manufacturer price exceeds the drug's inflation adjusted payment amount. This payment amount is based on the drug's benchmark period, and it increases by the Consumer Price Index. It requires the Secretary to report the rebate information to the manufacturer no later than 9 months after the end of each applicable period. Manufacturers are required to then pay that rebate within 30 days after receipt of the rebate information. The IRA applies civil monetary penalties if the manufacturer fails to pay. On October 14th, 2022, we posted a Federal Register notice And in that notice, some of the highlights to carry out these functions of this group, CMS will be hiring to develop policy, including identifying and vetting policy options and preparing policy memoranda, rulemaking, and technical guidance, establishing operational processes to collect data from manufacturers and other sources, conducting pharmacoeconomic analysis and assessment of selected drugs, establishing operational processes to negotiate and renegotiate the drug prices, establishing operational processes to calculate and invoice the rebates, procuring and managing contractors to support these functions, conducting stakeholder outreach and educational materials, and responding to inquiries from Congress, the press, and other external stakeholders. That is all for me, Sean. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria, and thanks so much for giving that that really informative background. So up next to talk about where these positions will be located or listed on USAJobs is the Director for the Division of Strategic Customer Relations, Shakia Ward.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As Sean mentioned, I will give a brief overview of USAJobs.gov and the application process. As he mentioned also, if you have any questions, please feel free to put the questions in the chat and we'll make sure that someone on our team responds to you. Next slide, please. So USAJobs.gov. This is really the hub for, for applying to government positions. And this is the site that you would come to search for jobs, to look at the requirements of the job, and ultimately submit your application. There's an opportunity here for you to see detailed opportunities, but today we'll talk more about the permanent positions or the temporary positions that we have available starting today, and we'll walk you through the application process and what to pay attention to. But first, before you even apply to a vacancy announcement, it's important to make note of one important thing. First, you must have an account. So if you do not have an account, please create, you see it here on the screen, a profile. The profile lets you put in information about yourself. It allows you to create or store resumes. And you may be wondering, why up to 5 resumes, right? I have 1 resume, and isn't that enough? And so we'll talk more about the benefit of having multiple resumes and why you may want to have multiple resumes. It also allows you to upload up to 10 attachments. And we will talk more about what those attachments may look like and why you should upload them to your profile. One benefit to uploading these documents to your profile is that it's always available. So when you log into your account and you want to apply for a position, you can select from the already stored documents there and proceed. Next slide. New search features. So I mentioned that using USAJobs, there is an opportunity for you to search using a keyword or location. I know a lot of times those who are in the private sector may not understand or know the titles or the position titles here at CMS, right? And one thing that comes to mind is our health insurance specialist. And so a lot of times you can use keywords, maybe try health analyst or policy planning, project planning, keywords like that to kind of help sort through all of the many positions that may be available on USAJobs. There are filters. You can filter by looking at pay, right? The job series, of course, if you're unfamiliar with the job series, you could look for, the hiring path. So if you are a current federal employee, you may want to look at positions that are only open to current federal employees. If you are considered among the public and do not have government status, then you may want to look at, positions that are open to the public. Okay. And then it allows you also, and I think this is a key feature here, it allows you to save searches. So again, we're talking about efficiency so that each time you go in to look for jobs, you don't necessarily have to start from the very beginning. By saving a search, you would receive automatic emails letting you know new positions that match your criteria. And we thought this was an awesome, awesome feature that USAJobs offer. Next slide. So let's look at the vacancy announcement. And for the next 5 or 7 minutes, we'll explore the vacancy announcement and we'll talk about the key sections of a vacancy announcement and what should be most important to you, what you want to pay attention to. And today we'll use the example of the health insurance specialist. This position is currently open, so thought it would be worthwhile to just talk about a position that we currently have open, and we are looking for quality and experienced professionals such as yourself. Some may, a term that may come to mind is, like health policy, and we talked about the key words and how you could search for this particular position. And so even if you didn't understand or know what the health insurance specialist position does, you could just maybe type in health or policy, and this position should, or program policy, this position should come up. So when you first click on the position, what you will see is a brief summary, right? To the right side of the screen, it's an overview of key details, such as the opening and close dates. This is the time period in which we are receiving and accepting resumes. And as you can see, this position is currently open for 30 days. However, there will be times throughout the process where managers may look through resumes before the closing of the announcement. Salary is also key. This is a clear or can be an indication of the type of experiences or the level of experiences, that one will need to have in order to qualify for this job. This is just the base salary for the position. So for additional information regarding like locality and pay rates, which is please, look there. There's a lot of information out there regarding our pay tables and how folks in the federal government is paid. As Sean mentioned, and this is fairly new for our agency, but we are excited to be able to offer remote jobs. And so this allows managers to select individuals anywhere in the US to come here and work for CMS. Next slide. So direct hire authority. Several positions are direct hire authority, which basically means that, it allows managers to quickly hire qualified individuals. It expedites the process. So it's different than the traditional government hiring. Not all of our positions are direct hire authority. However, because there is a need to fill these IRA positions quickly, we did get approval to announce several of our jobs via direct hire. And so you'll also see things like, I mentioned, who can apply to this position, right? Who can apply? There are several different career paths. However, the position that is currently open is open to the public. So that means all US citizens, anyone in the US, can apply, to this particular job, and for any of the jobs that will open. And so we mentioned that we have a ton of jobs. So again, we're using this health insurance specialist position just as an example, but just wanted to reiterate that there are several jobs that will open either today or throughout the week and even the month. It's important to know that individuals applying to this vacancy announcement must meet minimum qualification requirements. And we will talk about what those qualification requirements are for this job and where to find them if you were looking for them on another announcement. Next slide. So as we mentioned, this particular position is remote work eligible. And so folks can work anywhere in the US. And what this means, for those who want, what does it mean, remote work, right? And so it means that the position will require the employee to report to CMS office on a periodic basis, right? But not every day. So if you're used to, reporting to work 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, that's not the case here at CMS at this time. So individuals will have some flexibility in terms of when they would, be reporting to the workplace. Salary, Salary will be determined, once you are offered a tentative offer. And so this will range because, as we mentioned, it's remote work, so you can work anywhere in the US. And, locality, added to your base salary makes up your full pay. So, right now we cannot provide what that full pay would be because it's determined based on, the level of experience and the location where you live. Next slide. So the duties of the position. This is a section within the vacancy announcement that really provides the meat and potatoes about what this job offers. And so if you're unsure about, what to expect from this job, the duty, you want to look here, right? I do not want you to confuse this with the qualifications, and we'll talk more about the qualifications later on. In this section, it is just the duties. It gives you an idea, an overview of what you would be expected to perform when you come onto the job. Use this to decide if you are a good fit. If this is experience that you currently hold, you may not necessarily want to just tailor your resume around the duties. And we see this quite often. And the reason for that is because, again, we clearly identify what the qualification requirements are for this job. And, if you tailor your resume around just the duties, you may miss the criteria, the qualifications criteria, and so we don't want you to just confuse qualifications with duties. While it's good to understand the duties, also pay attention to the qualification section of the announcement to understand, in order for me to, to get an interview, what must I have? What must my resume have? Next slide. And so now here we are, right? Qualifications. And so for each posting, there will be a set of criteria, qualifications criteria. And again, I just want to highlight this is just for the health insurance specialist position that we currently have open, the policy, program policy. While every job will have a qualification section, the qualifications criteria will be different. So it's important that you read this section, that you understand it. A lot of times there are several different sentences or statements or qualifications. You want to make sure that you read each sentence and that your resume really does include all of this. And we will talk more about this, but if nothing else comes to mind, remember this: you always want to tell a story, right? So look at the qualification analysis section. What is it asking for you to have? Like what skill is it asking for you to have? And have you done this? And if you've done it, what was the outcome? What was the impact? How long have you done it for? And so I really want, to stress that this is a very, very important section of the vacancy announcement. This, ultimately determines whether or not you have this, determines whether you are afforded the next step in the process. One thing to note here, it says, you must demonstrate in your resume at least 1 year of experience, performing the following. And so again, really pay attention to the wording. You must have everything here, in your resume for at least 1 year, okay? Next slide, please. So in describing your experience, and we'll talk more about experience and not education, because this particular job, education is not going to be the determinant in terms of whether or not you make it forward. It's really going to be about the experience for this grade level. However, if you're looking for jobs there, on USAJobs, there could be an education requirement. So really pay attention to that, because if there is an education requirement, you want to make sure that you upload the applicable documentation. However, we encourage all of our applicants to utilize the USAJobs resume builder. Okay. Yes, it's just an encouragement. You can, if you built your resume in, let's say, Word, you can upload documents. However, we encourage you to use USAJobs because it basically is a template and include all of this information, or opportunity for you to enter in all of the information. And so you just don't run the risk of omitting something, because you've used your word resume. However, it is not a requirement that you use USAJobs resume builder. It's just a recommendation. But when you are building your resume, it is important to make sure that you include the following: the position title. What were you doing, right? What did they call you? Was it a program manager? Was it, health insurance specialist? Whatever the position title is, make sure you include that there. The duties, be specific in describing your duties. One of the terms that I've used before is to tell a story, right? To tell a story. We've seen some resumes where they list just accomplishments. In addition to your accomplishments, right? You want to make sure that you really describe what you've worked on, and some of, the impact, just do not leave it, just with accomplishments. Just, if you're in doubt, put it on there. Put it on there. We're quite different. And I know Ashley will go through some of the, the resumes, the do's and the don'ts. But we really like to see a lot of information on there. Employee's name and address. Yes, it's good to have the employee's name or address. It could be used for references later down the line. Start and end dates. This is going to be so important. If I had a marker, I would put a star here. Because again, part of the qualification requirements is that you must perform whatever it is for at least 1 year, 52 weeks. And so this is crucial. If there are no dates included on your vacancy announcement, the human resources specialist would throw the resume out. And so we want to make sure that you all make it to the process, right? We've come too far, we've gotten here, the announcement is up and running. We want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to apply and even move to the next step of the process. So please make sure that your resume includes everything that's listed here, especially, do not forget your dates. A lot of times we've seen, where they would put maybe 2007 to 2008. We recommend that you use this format, right? June 2007, April 2008. So month and year. Do not just rely on the years. Okay. And if it's a part-time status, you want to make sure you indicate part-time, or if it's full-time, indicate whether it's full-time. And salary is always good to just include on the resume. Again, these are just, again, it's required for us to really make a solid decision in terms of whether or not you are qualified. So this information is very, very helpful. And this is why we're saying that it's required to make sure it's captured in your resume. Next slide. So here are three. So we talked a lot about the announcement process. We talked a lot about, USAJobs and, qualifications. And so I'll leave you with these three things. The qualification section, please read that section. Please read it in its entirety. Please make sure that your resume reflect all of the criteria that is listed in that section, okay? All of the criteria that is listed in that section. Your resume. I got the question, or I used to get the question before, well, I applied to one health insurance specialist and I was found qualified because I received a notice, through my email, but then I applied to another health insurance specialist position and I was determined not qualified. And why is that so? And, yes, that is possible. It is possible for you to be found qualified for one position and not qualified for the other. And the reason is because the qualifications for each job could be different. And so it brings you to, bullet 2, your resume should be amended to ensure qualifications are stated. And so while, the qualifications criteria could be different, it's important just to review your resume just to make sure, it meets the criteria. And so you may have to amend your resume or even upload multiple resumes to USAJobs to ensure that, it's captured, that the information is captured in your resume. Human resources, I mentioned a human resources specialist on the other end of that computer who will be determining, looking at the vacancy announcement, looking at all the criteria, they will make a decision in terms of whether or not you meet the qualifications for the job, right? And so what they will not do is make assumptions. And that's why we really, really stress today about ensuring that all of the information that we've identified or listed for you is included in your resume. Please be clear. Please be clear. If there are any, let's say jargon, or I know here in the government, we use a lot of acronyms, right? Just spell the acronyms out just to make sure that the HR specialist understands what is it, that you're working on. If it's a particular system, they may need to research the system. And so just be clear about your qualifications in your resume. All right. And I think that sums it up to me. I'll hand it back over to you, Sean.
Thanks so much, Shakia, for that fantastic overview and really touching on the resume and how it should be amended to ensure qualifications are stated for each position and should be tailored to each job application on USAJobs. To dive a little bit deeper in that, in resumes is Ashley Harris from the Division of Strategic Customer Relations. Ashley, it's all yours.
Thanks, Sean. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we will be going over next the decoding federal resumes. So as you can see here, we kind of have a comparison chart between a private industry resume versus a federal resume. So a lot of people, some of you may already be in the federal government. However, we may have some on the line that are not. So this is very important for everyone to kind of understand the differences in how the resume could reflect in the federal world. So as you can see, just as far as length, you may be required in the private sector to have a more concise or shorter resume. However, in the federal world, you can have, it is expected that you may have 3 to 5 pages or longer, depending on your work experience or just any relevant education or accomplishments and things of that nature that you may include in a federal resume. Now, what we also recommend in a writing style, now granted, some of these are recommendations and it's not like it has to be exactly the way that it's stated here. However, this is the best way to format your resume so that the hiring managers as well as the HR staff is able to clearly see your skill set and your background that you possess within your resume. So typically, sometimes you may have a simple like bullet point format in your resume currently. We would recommend that you create a small narrative paragraph, as you can see below here where it says database administrator, and kind of putting that in all caps so it stands out. So it's easy to read, and the HR specialists are able to clearly understand that this is one of the skill sets that may be needed in regards to the specialized experience, as Shakia has mentioned previously. You want to make sure that you're being very specific in the experience that you're mentioning, because in doing so, that is helping to resonate to the HR specialist that you are able to perform at least the minimum skills needed for this position. Especially, again, going back to the qualifications section of the vacancy announcement. Of course, now when it goes to like keywords and skills, again, that's also referring back to the actual announcement that you have. So as Shakia stated, you may have applied to a management analyst position and you're applying to another management analyst position. However, we post positions with the same title all over our agency. So you want to be sure that the skills that are required of you in one vacancy announcement versus the other are reflected as such. You don't want to just have a one-fits-all resume just for that specific position title. So please make sure that you're, again, reading the announcement in its entirety and making sure you're reflecting the skills needed within your resume itself. And the difference also where we have in the review process versus a private industry or the federal resume, private industry, they may be having a actual software system that may be reading your resume versus in our agency, we have a specific person or persons that are reviewing your resume by hand. So it is a manual process. So you want to make sure that there are no, discrepancies or questions that they may have, that you're very clear in what you're stating as far as your experience is concerned. Also making sure that if there are any license or transcripts, things of that nature that are needed for a specific position, you are uploading them at the time of application. Please do not wait to upload important documentation after the fact. Again, as we said here with the formatting, we highly advise for you to use all caps in the skill sets that you're highlighting within your experience. It just helps to be easier to read. Again, these are recommendations for how you should format the federal resume itself. Sean, if you could go to the next slide, please. So, of course, your resume should communicate the qualifications. You should be able to provide immediate results and convey your best impression. Again, you want to make sure that you're being clear and clutter-free. You're only putting in experience that is relevant to the position you're applying to, not including previous experience that may not have any relevancy to the position of interest. Next slide. So the targeted resume, that's extremely important. Again, that's going with the tailoring. And 9 times out of 10, when you're reviewing the announcement itself and you're looking at the duties and things like that, please just make sure you're zoning into the actual skills that they're listing, or even say, for instance, some positions you may be able to substitute like education for experience and things like that. However, once you get to a certain GS level within just in the government in general, you're not able to sometimes substitute that. So you want to make sure that you're listing all skills, not 1 or 2 of the skills listed, but every single one that they have in the actual qualifications area. Next slide, please. So this is an example right here, a great example of a resume that is using the format that we mentioned earlier, as far as highlighting the skills themselves in all caps, so that we can see that specific area that you've experienced in your career, as well as a little narrative description. As you can see here, we have an accomplishment section. You want to make sure that you're stating things that are relevant, of course, but also stand out. So this is kind of it's some information, it's not overwhelming. So you're trying to be concise, but also making sure that you're clear, that you're getting across all the information of the experience that you possess within that role. However, for instance, if you have a position of yours that you've been in the same title, but maybe you've progressed as far as your responsibilities and things like that, please state that difference, because just because you've had the same job title does not technically mean you've done the same work over the years. So please make sure that you're alluding to the various responsibilities that you may have possessed within that role. Next slide, please. So again, these are important things to mention. Please include the month and year for each experience listed, as well as the hours per week. That is extremely important, especially for those that are currently in the federal government, for our HR specialists to determine the time and grade within that position. Also, again, as I said before, please separate each experience. So if you're a program analyst at an entry level, and then you remain in that role, but you're now receiving higher duties, please separate that so that we can see that work progression that you've experienced in that role. Also, the qualifying experience, please, 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 we cannot say it enough, to make sure that your resume exudes any of the skill sets that are listed, and make sure it's all of the skill sets, not just a couple of them. Next slide, please. So we're going to go over some do's and don'ts about federal resumes. So for the do's, again, with the narratives that you may be including in your resume, try to quantify as much as possible. Try to make your skills quantifiable. So for instance, if you had a sales role and you were able to achieve a goal of, say, a certain volume of sales, try to say within that time frame, like how quickly did you do that? Did you, allow for $60,000 of sales in 3 months? Just be as specific as possible, but also quantify that experience so that one can gauge exactly, the experience that you have had. Also, please review your resume top to bottom to make sure that it's error-free of any typos, grammatical errors. That is very important. Also, again, reiterating the tailoring of your resume to fit the vacancy announcement, no matter of the title, and also making sure that you're uploading and submitting all the required documentation at the time of application, because once the position closes, unfortunately, you're not allowed or able to submit any additional documentation at that time. Next slide. So as far as the don'ts, as far as the job description expressions, we know it's very common that a lot of people will, include duties or responsibilities and things of that nature. And it's not an issue. However, we believe that it would be a better visibility if you are to include accomplishment-oriented phrases. And you can just do a quick search on your internet to see what that may look like, what some accomplishment-oriented phrases may look like to have a better look and feel to your resume. Of course, please do not embellish or inflate any of your accomplishments or level of responsibility. Please be very transparent and honest about the current experience that you possess. And do not include any personal information, pictures of age, date of birth, marital status, things like that. Of course, make sure you have a up-to-date contact information, whether that be your telephone number or email address. That's absolutely fine, but you don't need to get too specific in your personal information. And of course, if you're making your resume searchable on USAJobs, which we highly recommend, you would not want others to be able to view that information. And again, you want to make sure that you're having a resume for each position that you're applying to. And you actually are able to upload up to 5 resumes on usajobs.gov, as well as you're able to upload at least 10 documents on your profile. Next slide. And I believe that is it for the federal resumes. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sean.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for giving that great overview on federal resumes and how to look for the specialized experience and make sure you include that there. So this wraps up our webinar for today. Thanks everyone who joined today. And thanks all the presenters, and thank you everyone who's answering questions in the chat right now. We will continue to stay on the line and answer all the questions in the Q&A box until we're finished. But just want to remind everyone who pre-registered today that you will receive a follow-up email with the slides, and that this video was recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel, as well as our IRA careers page. And to find all of our current open IRA careers or our open job announcements, that can also be found on our IRA careers webpage, which my colleague is posting in the chat. But again, thank you so much, everyone who joined. If you have any questions, you can continue to reach out to us at our CMS recruitment team email box, and the email address will be posted in the chat as well. So we're going to stay on the line. We're going to answer questions in the Q&A. If you have any last minute questions, please feel free to post them there, and then we'll finish out by answering the questions in the Q&A. Thank you, and have a great day.